This video is sponsored and made possible by Nvidia. So, what is a megabase? We often hear people talking about megabases, but what is one? Is this a mega build? No. Is this mega? Kind of. Is this mega? Yes. A megabase is not defined by how complicated or difficult a Minecraft build is, but by excessive scale. Here's an example. Here's my Minecraft mansion from Season 7 of Hermitcraft. It's pretty mega. But take a look at this giant dirt block. It's also mega. In this tutorial, I want to teach you and take you through the process of building a mega base. However, we want to make something a little bit better than a giant dirt block. So I've enlisted the help of my friend PearlescentMoon and partnered with Nvidia on Minecraft with RTX for Windows 10 to give you a walkthrough tutorial on how to make mega bases. Good mega bases, not just giant dirt blocks. I'm sure you can figure out how to make a giant dirt block. So let's start with the first step. Planning. Yes, I know this may not sound like the most exciting part, but with a mega base, it's a really, literally big project. Good planning will save you time on rebuilds and mistakes. The biggest hurdle to overcome at this stage is figuring out what you would like to make. So for us, we're going to be making a giant castle on an island. And the first thing that we needed to do was come up with an inspiration and a plan. So we went on the internet and we looked for some inspiration and we found this. This is Mont Saint-Michel in northern France. Yes, it's a real place and yes, it is gorgeous. We're going to be making our castle based on this. In fact, we even took this picture and we edited it to try and make it look more like the outcome we're looking for. I say we, it was definitely PearlescentMoon because I can't draw. So we've got our inspiration pictures and we've also got our own sketch of what we would like to make. So now we're ready to actually start building. And unfortunately, we're still in the planning stages. So we know we want a giant castle on an island. Well, we're going to start off by marking out just the general proportions of what we want to make. So we started off with a singular block of red wool, and we're going to be making just a square floating above the water to kind of mark out how big we want this to be. Now, there's no firm definition of how big is mega, but to give you some indication, this is going to be about 200 blocks wide and 250 blocks tall, and that's a pretty good estimation of how to make something definitively mega. So we started off by making this giant cross, and we even gave it a 1x1 pole all the way up to build height. So now we've got our general proportions and we need to mark out what our terrain is going to be. We are now going to mark out exactly what our island will look like. Using this rough sketch that Pearl made, we're going to make our way round our general outline to create what we think the island should look like. Just generally, it doesn't need to be super exact, just something very rough cut and two-dimensional. So this is what we're left with, and we were pretty accurate to the sketch that PearlescentMoon put together. So our next task is not actually to get started on the terrain, we actually need to do a little bit more planning out on the 2D scale. So what we're going to do now is create another wool shape of where we want our walls to sit on the island. So we made the outline of the island and we've changed that to white concrete. We then went ahead and made a 2D shape of where we want our first layer of walls to be. By making just a simple 2D outline, you save yourself a lot of hassle later down the line. For example, what if we had made this island and then found out we wanted to make a size way bigger than this? The island would then become obsolete. This sort of planning is essential to a mega build. And that brings us to the end of stage 1. To summarize, you have in your planning stage, decide what you want to build, conceptualize and get inspiration, and make a 2D plan in Minecraft. Now, we are officially ready to move on to the second stage of the mega build, which is the terrain. Now, not every single mega build needs terrain. If you've got a more geometric style base, probably not necessary, but our one involves a lot of terrain. So what we're going to do is hop into a time lapse, and I'm going to quickly explain as we go through it what we're doing. It uses a huge amount of Java tools such as World Edit and Voxel Sniper, therefore it may not relate to absolutely everyone, but you'll get the idea of what's necessary before we move on to actually building the structure. We needed to get rid of the water first of all so that we could actually build the base of our island. Now, if you're doing this in survival, you don't do the inside, obviously. You just build up the outside in a singular layer. But because we have tools available to us, we're able to make them even out of diamond blocks because we can do whatever we like, basically. So we built it up to the height that we wanted it, keeping as much of the wool in there as possible, and we even added a layer so we could see where the waterline would be. We then retextured the island, and we were left with this. And we kind of experimented with different palettes, and then we put the water back. Obviously, this doesn't represent a full vanilla experience. If you were doing this by hand, it would take an extreme amount of time, which is why you need to be careful when you select what you're going to make. So we have built this entire island using Java tools. Now, I have to say, if this has scared you at this point of the video, please don't let it. We've obviously gone a bit above and beyond what is possible in survival Minecraft, and especially when you're dealing with the ocean. So my advice would be, if you are considering doing terrain, do it on land, but remember, if you're doing something more geometric, you don't have to do any terrain at all. You could just do a floating shape. Now, the next stage is to actually start our build. The terrain is here, it's all integrated into the ocean for our one, and now you'll see that we've still got some of our wool laid out. Now this is going to be the outer wool of the castle, and we've got them in different colours to help us figure things out. Now that is where the top of our base is going to be, our mega build, and it is all the way at height limit. It cannot get any taller than that, so in a way, this is about as mega as it gets unless you want to excavate the entire world, which, trust me, you don't. The next stage is the skeleton build. Okay, so what we're going to be doing now is basically taking just wool outlines, and you can use any block, but it's really useful when you've got different colors, to mark out just what I would call the skeleton of the build. This allows you to experiment with the shape of everything you're going to be making for this mega build without actually filling it in. Now, this obviously still takes quite a lot of time, effort, and resources if you're doing this in survival, but marking it out in a skeleton will allow you to constantly be taking a step back, assessing the size and the scale and how it's going to fit in, and making amendments without it costing you too many redos. So that's what we're going to be doing now, taking our time to slowly build up a skeleton full of shapes on this entire island, and all of a sudden this build will start to take some kind of form. So it's time to hop into another time lapse where we mark all of these things out. Now, just like we are in this time lapse, you want to be taking some kind of outline block and be making the largest, most general shapes you can for your mega build. Do not get too detailed at this point. We are just trying to get an overall general shape. We use multicolored wool to make sure that each segment is more digestible and stands out amongst the others, so that when you take a step back, you can see the different elements of the build. And now we've moved over to Bedrock Edition, Minecraft on Windows 10. And what we've got here is ray tracing. I did a video previously on it, and it basically just makes everything look amazing. You get reflections, you get light rays, and I thought it would make this video even more epic to do the time lapse using ray tracing. We got PearlescentMoon over here, who is a chicken in Bedrock Edition, which is always fun. Well, what are we doing next? We've got our outlines ready, and we see all the different segments. Now we need to start filling them out with blocks. Now, in order to do that, we need to know which blocks to fill them out with. Now, if you were building your own base, you may already know what blocks you want. A useful thing to do is to lay them out like this in a gradient, and kind of get to grips with which ones are going to be your most important. For us, we're going to be using rather odd block, brown mushroom block, and we're going to be using smooth sandstone. These are going to make up the walls and the wall tower. These are our two primary blocks. Public safety announcement, don't use mushroom block in survival mode. You will not enjoy it. But since we're building this in creative, we can use whatever block we want, no matter how difficult it is to get our hands on. So over here, we're going to be using the grey concrete as our primary roof colour. So figuring out which blocks you want to use and which ones will just be used for detailing is kind of important. But for now, what we want to be doing is filling out each of these spaces using our primary blocks. So we know our blocks, and it's time to start filling this out. Are you ready, Pearl?
Let's go.
Now this section doesn't need too much explaining, because basically we take what we've got with our skeleton, and just like we start filling them out with the different blocks we want to use. I can give you some general advice while we see this though. I would recommend differentiating each part or segment of the build and doing them in a different color. If you use the same block over and over again, the whole build will blend into one. So you can tell we've used the towers and the walls all in a different colored block. Also, if you use darker colors at the bottom and lighter at the top, it will draw the eyes upwards, which is a nice effect. While we're filling all these bits out, it gives me a chance to talk about how this video was made. This time-lapse was actually filmed using a laptop, powered with an NVIDIA GeForce RTX 3080 laptop graphics card, one of the most powerful graphics cards on the market. And while the laptop was recording, Pearl and I were building in the Minecraft world using our regular PCs. I was actually a bit surprised when this laptop arrived, because gaming laptops are traditionally quite large and heavy, but this was compact but still very powerful. Now, if you have an RTX graphics card like this machine does, it allows you to play Minecraft with RTX for Windows 10, which is now out of beta, and you can apply it in the same way you do a resource pack. That's with all the fancy lighting and the ray tracing. It basically improves the graphics, but with really great performance. If you're interested in the new line of RTX powered laptops, there's a link in the description. Be warned, the RTX 3080 laptops are the most expensive from the line, but for the gaming performance that they give, they're actually pretty good value. Now, let's continue building our mega build. Now, while we fill out the rest of this build, I want to give another general bit of advice for building mega builds. When you use a block palette or the different kinds of blocks, try not to see what they are in quotation marks, like wood or stone, but just view them as colors. For example, in this build we're using sandstone, wood, and mushroom block, but we don't care what they're called. All we care about is the color and the texture. Try to focus on that when you make a mega build. Take a look at the reflection of this. Absolutely amazing. So we filled out all of the skeletons into full general blank walls, and you end up with a general shape. So we can take a step back and review this now, and honestly, there's nothing I want to change. I think we really nailed it. I would love to have made it taller. You know, it feels like there's a segment missing here, but we've reached build limit. We literally can't go any higher than that. So it might look a little stunted, but that's just Minecraft limitations. With everything filled out, it doesn't take a lot of imagination to imagine what this would look like in its finished state. So, what's the next stage? Well, the next stage is currently underway. Over here, you can see there are more wool skeletons being made, but this is much smaller. As you can see, these shapes are way smaller scale than what we were doing here with the giant walls and the giant towers. So what we're doing now is we're basically repeating the same two steps. We're making more wool skeletons and attaching it to the base to try and define this shape even more. Now, the reason that we do them in two separate stages is because if you tried to do these smaller wool skeletons, while there's still a larger skeleton, it becomes so overwhelming and difficult to visualize. So by breaking it up into steps, you make it much more digestible from a builder's perspective. And also, our build today is asymmetrical, meaning it looks different from every angle. So at the back here, we've got this really nice feature with all of these arches, and it gives you something different to look at. Now, mega builds can come in many shapes and sizes. You may have a more geometric base. That means symmetry is very important. You might want all the sides to look the same. So depending on what you're making, you may want to just copy paste or, just make sure you mimic everything. But for us on this one, we want to make sure that there's real diversity in the shape of the build. And that's kind of key for us. So now let's head into the next stage of the time lapse where we define this structure a little more with more smaller scale wool skeletons. And then I'm pretty sure you can figure out what we're going to do after that. Yeah, we're going to fill them in. But for now, let's define the shape and review once we've got that done. At this point in your mega build, you want to be honing in on a more refined shape for your mega build. So we're focusing on the medium level shape. So down here, we're working on houses, but when we move up to the next level, we just want to refine what we already have. So where there would be one big blocky cube, maybe we add a tower or we add some roofs where there weren't before. So we're just trying to give the build more shape than it had before. And at the same time, trying not to overcomplicate the build. And we're also still using all of those different kinds of colored wool so that we can differentiate each part easily, making it even easier for us in the next few stages. So we're basically repeating those same steps, but we're refining it from the big shapes to the medium shapes. We are entering the final stages of this project, although there is still a huge way to go. So as you can see, we've got multiple new wool outlines for the more intricate parts of this mega build. And you can see why we divide it up into segments. So we did the big bits first and filled them in, and then we did these little bits. Obviously, if we did all of the wool at the same time, it would become so overcomplicated and you'd never get any of it done just because you wouldn't know which bit was which. So by taking it in stages, we enable ourselves to make the build, which is massive, a little bit more digestible. So this is where we've got to so far. We've got multiple little houses that are going to go on this lower layer of the castle, and then it becomes a little less intricate as we get higher up on the build. But unfortunately, there is a lot more to do. And as with any mega build, it takes an extraordinary amount of time. Pearl and I have been working on this for about 3 or 4 weeks now, and this is as far as we've got. Admittedly, we did quite a lot of the building by hand, as you saw in the time lapse, which is why it took so long. But it's a fair warning for anyone that wants to undertake a mega build. Yeah, they take a huge amount of time, so I have to split this video into 2 parts. So all there is left to say is thank you very much for watching. We're going to get working straight away on the second part of this mega build tutorial, and I want to say another huge thank you to Nvidia for sponsoring and supplying the laptop for making this video. But anyway, we will get cracking on the next episode, and I shall see you in part 2, and we shall finish this mega build. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye!